session that we are going to cover, the title is Conquering COVID, okay, Lessons Learned 2 Years On. Before we start the session, could I just ask the individual panelists to give a quick round of introduction about yourself, where you come from, and your role in your organization. Starting from Brad.
Thank you. I'm Brett Marshall. I'm the Corporate Head of Quality Assurance and Health, Safety, Security of the Environment for Zuellig Pharma. I've been looking after the quality assurance role for the organisation for the last 7 years. I've been with the company 20 years and 28 years in Asia. My team is responsible for managing the quality across the 13 markets that we operate. And as Zuellig Pharma is one of the largest healthcare services providers and also one of the largest vaccine distributors in Asia. So it's been a tremendous responsibility over the last couple of years in particular.
Sounds like you've been busy, Brett. My name is Stephanie Krishnan. I'm an Associate Vice President for Manufacturing and Energy Insights with IDC. As part of that, my research actually goes into Industry 4.0, and a big part of that has been on pharmaceutical and medical devices manufacturing. So we actually were co-authors as part of the Conquering COVID blueprint that was first put out, and that's what we're here to dissect today is performance.
Hey, I think from my side I'm going to keep it short. Derek did a fantastic introduction at the beginning of my presentation, so Carsten Spiegelberg, just hand it back to you.
I'm a founder of SFS Pharma Logistics. We are a specialty courier company specializing in transporting clinical trials, comparators, vaccines across Asia Pacific and globally. We have presence across 12 Asian countries. So our area of focus is 100% only on pharma coaching. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. So you can see on this stage we have a panel of experts ranging from different backgrounds, from the market intelligence, from the healthcare, freight forwarding service providers, as well as logistics automation providers. So we have the honor of them coming here to share with us their views and insights, okay, on what has transpired, particularly across these 2 years, and what do they think, okay, might be happening in the future. Like what Stephanie mentioned earlier on, okay, there is this blueprint called the Conquering COVID-19 and Assault Plan for COVID-19 Vaccine Supply Chain Distribution that was published by LSCMS in collaboration with IDC in the year 2020. So if you want to find this blueprint, you just Google LSCMS, IDC, COVID-19. I'm sure it's the first item on the Google page. So, as Stephanie is one of the co-authors for this blueprint, okay, we will start with her, and then because she's the only lady on board, so ladies first. First, let's invite Stephanie to share about the objectives of this blueprint, as well as looking at the time that the blueprint was published until now. So what are some of the requirements or changes in terms of addressing the scale as well as the complexity of the different supply chain challenges that she has seen so far? Stephanie?
Thanks, Derek. So at the time when the blueprint was published, it was November 2020, and at that time we were seeing the potential release of vaccines. So it was a lot of speculation as to when they were coming out, and I think they came out within 4 to 6 weeks after the blueprint was published. We were, doing this with the support of the head of supply chain for the World Economic Forum, and looking at, what were going to be the major hurdles that would be faced by organisations in distributing these vaccines. There were a number of concerns around equity. There was obviously a belief that there would be less of a concern in the global north, where temperatures are cooler and there are more affluent countries that would be able to afford the sort of capabilities that would be required to deliver on the vaccines. But there are a lot of concerns about the global south. And the idea was to put together an approach that would enable organisations countries to deal with this. We brought together 20 companies and their experts, and this included 3PLs, pharma distribution companies, manufacturers, government organisations, technology companies, and with the technology companies we looked at the physical technology as well as the information technology, going into things like data and analytics as well. And of course we brought in the health industry. A number of issues were highlighted at the time. One was the scale of the operation that was needed, the need for visibility and the ability to be agile in that distribution process. A number of risks were highlighted. A lot of that was around temperature control, obviously, but also around the fake vaccines. With regards to temperature control, I mean, Carsten, you brought up the fact that there was, a 20-fold increase in cold storage since 2015. But one of the areas that was raised is where is this located, and where would this be of value to the vaccine supply chain? I mentioned earlier about vaccine equity and uneven distribution. There was obviously issues associated with remote access, dealing with poorer countries in the global south and the warmer climates that they're dealt with. So this was kind of the scope that we were looking at as we went through it. I think in terms of where we've come, we have seen a lot of that come to fruition. We have seen the global north being better able to deal with the vaccine distribution point, but as the WHO continually raises, there are still issues in getting vaccines out to more remote locations or those that are poorer countries. So I'll just pause there and we can, Brett could probably comment as well.
Thanks, Stephanie. I think what the blueprint brought or did was to bring together in a quite unique way at the time a range of stakeholders, different stakeholders with a common purpose, and I think it actually detailed it gives some great detail in the potential situation as we saw it at the time. Certainly what I don't think anybody anticipated, because one of the major concerns we had was about the capacities of supply chains to be able to move large volumes of vaccines. And certainly here in Asia, we didn't anticipate that those huge volumes never really materialised. And the whole of Asia was very much on a drip feed from suppliers in Europe and the US. And available supplies that were anticipated to come from India, so very large volumes were expected to come from India, didn't emerge at all because India shut down its exports, and we had some limited export limitations out of Europe as well. So while we had initial concerns on capacity, we did have sufficient time to ramp up, and there has been significant investment around the region in capability or establishing capability to store ultra-low temperature vaccines at -80 and -25. That really didn't exist in large scale before, but there is certainly a capability now, an established capability for that. And I think in terms of cold chain infrastructure, there has been significant investment around the region. It's probably a question for some companies going forward as to how they're going to be able to use that capacity. The other point I'll just make quickly is that the role of government was very interesting in Asia, and I think where in Europe you had a reasonably common response from the European Union, and the US is very much a homogenous market. But the countries in Asia were very much operating on their own, and so different governments chose different approaches for the distribution of vaccines in their countries. Indonesia was very focused on a national manufacturing capability and distribution capability. Thailand was very much focused on establishing imports and was one of the countries to early engage with manufacturers to get supplies. So there were different strategies by different governments, and that impacted, I think, the ability to get vaccines to the population as well. Maybe I'll stop there.
Thanks, Brett, for sharing about this experience. So I think the way that different governments work, I think, is something that most of us, we might not have the awareness. Okay? Only global companies like Zulik Pharma, as you handle all this distribution, that you will be able to be in a better position to share all this information. So just to share a bit about my experience during the COVID days as well. So in the March 2020, so I was actually seconded to the Ministry of Health under the Singapore government, not as a frontliner doing the swabbing. Okay, I was in the back end resource management department, helping to manage the distribution of PPE from the centralized warehouse to the various healthcare sectors. I ended my stint in August 2020. So that was the time whereby we heard the government talking about the imports of vaccines and all the challenges coming about. So unfortunately, I was ending my stint there, so I wasn't involved in that part of the discussion. But I think over here, maybe Roger, you can share with us as well. You are also one of the contributors to the COVID-19 Assault Plan Blueprint. So what have you experienced throughout these 2 years, and what have you seen in terms of the evolution of how these vaccines are being brought into Singapore, and even in terms of the packaging systems requirements? Have there been any changes or innovation, etc.?
Yeah, so when the first vaccine was announced that it's going to be at minus 70 degrees, I think the whole of this company wasn't prepared to move vaccines at minus 70. It was like everyone was talking about how you transport bulk vaccines from the source, from the manufacturing, down to the final destination. So no one was talking about last mile. So the focus was only minus 70. And then people start thinking, hey, the traditional way to do dry shipments at minus 70 is styrofoam boxes. Then comes to sustainability. What happens after you deliver? And then the other challenge is that you have to go to remote areas where you deliver vaccines. A styrofoam box lasts with dries, enormous amount of dries, 3 days. So companies are very fast to innovate. So manufacturing companies, especially the thermal box manufacturing companies, they were quick to innovate. And one company came up with a very innovative solutions. They use vacuum insulated panels, small quantity of dries, put in a GPS loggers, and they can track real-time shipments from the source down to the final distribution. This was a project which I was only involved in the transporting that research box from Europe into Singapore. And that's how I come to know that eventually the vaccines at minus 70 will be done on a very high performance box that can last for at least 10 days. Then comes to next, they talk about dries, that the world will be shortage of dries because you need an enormous amount of dries to transport this huge amount of vaccines. But with the high performance box that is reusable, not only address sustainability, you need to use very little dries to keep the vaccines for at least 10 days. Now, next thing is that minus 20. There wasn't any solution for minus 20. Only one company had that minus 20 solution in terms of very bulk shipment. And they were the first movers, and they managed to get the contracts to move minus 20 vaccines. So over time, fast forward 2 years later, you find that everyone right now have a full range of packaging solutions from minus 20 to 8 to move vaccines around the world. And addressing on the last mile, but there's still a shortage of last mile, as what Brett says earlier. In the Asia context, everyone, the government, they are doing things their own way. So you find that there's a lot of local players coming out with innovative solutions to transport these vaccines. And the next things you need to address is that you cannot inject a minus 70 or a minus 20 vaccine into a human. You need to thaw it. So there's always a supply chain issues that you bring the source in bulk to a depot, and probably you thaw it to 2 to 8, and then you have a lifespan, and then you transport these 2 to 8 vaccines to the community centers or to the hospitals or the polyclinics, and then we inject it to the patients. So these are things that has evolved and changed over the last 2 years. It's proven that whatever the critics says 2 years ago that is difficult, it's actually not difficult. It has been done already. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for your insights, Roger. So you talk about having to thaw, having to store, as well as inventory controls of all these supplies. Okay, so perhaps Gaston, you could share with us what you have seen over these few years. Okay, how organizations have been better managing such inventory requirements or storage requirements.
Well, I mean, when you listen to what was said earlier, Brett, Stephanie, I think you can very much picture that on the intralogistics side, there was actually not too much of a requirement for storage. Yeah? We're talking on one hand about the very low temperature vaccines, -70, -80 degree, which are shipped in specialized boxes that go straight from the source to the distribution, buffering, storing these boxes along the way. In the end, didn't really require much of an infrastructure. What we do see is that, and it would also not make sense really to build a building to keep that down to -70, -80 degree at all times. So the storage requirement for this kind of vaccine is intralogistics perspective not an issue, it's not existing. On the other hand, I know of one vaccine-specific warehouse, that is where I live now, in Dubai. Dubai, at a very early stage, decided to team up with Sinopharm. They actually have a Sinopharm production site in Abu Dhabi. And they were also aiming at becoming a transit hub between the manufacturers in Europe and India, and then mainly the African continent. So we built a warehouse actually there, specifically for -20 degree vaccine storage. If you happen to follow Bill Gates, he has apparently visited that 2 weeks ago. So on Instagram you see a nice video of that facility. Quite surprisingly, and that was the demand that was put on us as the supplier of that facility. It's a selective racking, conventional operation, 3.5 meter aisle, so it's anything but efficient. Don't ask me why it was built like that, but it does exist.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so at this point, I think we have heard from all of the experts. I'd like to use this time to open to the floor. Are there any questions from anyone that you would like to share or check with them, or do you have any comments about this whole COVID 2 years of experience that you have undergone? Yeah. Thank you.
My name is Marcus Lemaster. Just to extend this out a bit, we've been focused on the vaccines and focused on the cold chain in the discussion here. What I'd be interested from whoever's got the best position on this is, how did this, during this 2-year period and the real focus on moving the vaccines, moving the cold chain, all the urgency and criticality affect the other side of the business? So moving I would say the normal pharmaceuticals around. Because I know there's a huge amount of effort and a huge amount of manpower went in this. Did it have any impact on the normal distribution channels for that?
Maybe I can start off answering that one, Marcus. I think what happened in the early periods of the pandemic was that there was a dramatic reduction in demand, obviously because people being locked up were not able to visit doctors, not able to visit pharmacies. So the supplies were available, but the product wasn't moving for a number of months. Through the latter half of 2020, we did see an increase in product volumes moving again. And through 2021, that market continued to bounce back, so the volume continued to strengthen, and we're pretty much back to where we were pre-COVID. We were impacted in different markets at different times by the outbreak of COVID within our own teams, and that certainly had an impact at times on our ability to turn around orders. But with the contingency plans that we put in place, we were usually able to get back to where we needed to be. We had some challenges in a market like Malaysia, where there's a lot of foreign worker labour that's used, and there was a great outbreak of COVID amongst the foreign workers, so that put a bit of pressure on our operations as well. But by and large, for the business as usual portion, that has been pretty stable and pretty continuous.
I'd just say, from a frontline worker, I mean, hats off to the frontline workers. They did an amazing job during that. But I know in Singapore, there was a lot of utilisation of the armed forces as well to bring in contingent labour to help with some of the operational aspects of that, which I think allowed for the flex in the industry to an extent, and at some points it was near breaking point. But it still allowed for that flex that perhaps allowed for normal or near normal or new normal medical conditions to be delivered as well. So I think different countries had different methods, but in Singapore that was one way of dealing with it. I personally worked on the call centre to make sure people were where they needed to be for safe distancing. I have other volunteers that worked in hospitals and things like that to help with that sort of flex. So there was a manpower flex to help with that capability and with that capacity in order to continue delivery not just of the COVID side of the business but also the other, or the care, I should say.
Yeah, Stephanie's volunteers with the SAF Volunteer Corps. Justin?
From the intralogistics perspective, it's quite an interesting question to answer. We see multiple facets, multiple impacts there, depending on where you look from. I mean, you know that industrialized countries, especially Europe, is very highly automated in pharmaceutical operation in general. Because they have daily deliveries to independent pharmacies, small volumes, high SKU range that has been shipped. They were struggling because these systems were not set up to do bulk deliveries for masks and whatever there was coming to be distributed to the pharmacies. Bulk deliveries, the sudden increase in demand for very, very COVID-specific products, they were just not set up. So they had to open up a new operating process to handle that demand. When you look at countries that are less automated per se in this pharmaceutical distribution, we had the opposite effect because of the online business, because of more direct demand. They were struggling to follow that because they didn't have that automation level and the manpower in place to entertain that perspective of increase, but they were very, very well positioned when it came to the bulk distribution of COVID-related products. So, yeah, we had to work on both ends at the end.
Yeah, Roger?
Just a quick one. So basically the airline industry was crippled during COVID. So now all the other drugs that have to move, demand planning becomes very critical. Whether for air or for sea, a lot of delays at the seaport, as you can see. So pharma customers, when do the last mile, they have to plan way in advance. Of course, air ferries also goes up crazily. And there are things that clinical trials just went down the drain with COVID. So now you evolve a new business direct to patient to overcome the COVID situation. Thank you.
Add-on question to that. So is there any difference in handling or distribution of COVID vaccines as compared to other vaccines?
Yeah, so the traditional vaccines is kept at 2 to 8 degrees. So usually when you import in bulk, you store it in the refrigerator and then you can immediately administer the vaccine to the patients. But when it comes to -70 and -20, then you got to look at where are you doing the last mile, whether it's going to be a remote area or to a place with good facilities. So usually, I think the most easiest, most governments will adopt will be thawing the vaccine at 2 to 8, and then it can last for about 30 days, and then you transport this to the sites, and then you inject. Because always the unknown will be that at -70 or -20, how do you know at the site whether they get proper refrigeration to keep it at 2 to 8, and whether the vaccine they inject, is it at the correct temperature or is it already expired?
If I could just add on to that, and Roger's made a couple of very good points there. Because these were new medications, the COVID vaccines were new medications as well, so there was no stability data when they were first, when the distribution of the products first began, and so the requirements to hold at the specified temperatures were quite strict. There was an awareness of being able to store at 2 to 8 for a period of time, and it varied between the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine, for example. But as time went on and more stability data became available, then we saw the horizons for storage at 2 to 8, which is what almost 100% of existing vaccines are kind of structured to manage. That period of time at 2 to 8 has extended. I think it's still pretty much limited to a maximum of 30 days. And certainly where we've been involved with sending to vaccination centres, in many cases we've been involved in managing that thaw process and also attaching a label to the vial that designates the date the thaw date, so that they know what the expiry date will be for that particular vial of vaccine.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so earlier on, Brett mentioned about things like lockdown, etc. So in terms of the disruption, not just COVID, but there's also disruption due to the ongoing war in Russia, etc. So all this has also affected the transportation availability and the rates, etc. So do you see this having an impact on the efficiency of how vaccine has been distributed throughout the different parts of the world? Brett, maybe start from you.
So far, no. I think certainly the cost of transport has increased, and I think where governments in this part of the world will be starting, well, they are concerned that the potential inflationary impact on providing healthcare services is going to impact accessibility for patients. So I think that will be a concern over the short to medium term, unless there is some resolution here.
Okay. The rest of the panelists, anyone to share? Roger, do you see any impact on your business? Rates are too expensive.
Yeah, the impact of it, your price is getting more expensive than last year. So that's a common word I get. So I got to explain about the war in Russia and Ukraine, fuel increase, no airline space, who pays more get the space. So that's a common problem as a logistics company. That's what I face.
Thank you. Okay, before we continue, any more questions from the floor? Anyone has any other things? Anything to check? Okay, if not, let me move to the next part. Okay, so during this COVID period, I think one of the buzzwords that has been going around is digital transformation. And with digital transformation lies in the adoption of technology. So from your point of view, okay, technology, how has it actually helped in increasing the performance and the overall operational efficiency in your organization? Could you share with us some of your thoughts on this? Maybe let's start with Carsten.
For us, data, I mentioned in my presentation earlier, is very important. We need to understand the business that our clients, the user, are dealing with, to be able to identify the correct solution, to get the most benefits out of a solution. We unfortunately often face a scenario where the data is probably available, but it is not seen that it is available. The visibility, we say we need to have this kind of information, and the answer is, oh, we don't have it. And only the digging and questioning then at one stage reveals, well, yes, there is data and there is usable data. So I think it's important when you talk to us as a system supplier to be transparent, to be open-minded, and see the benefit in also sharing data with us. The other aspect is very often confidentiality, where especially on the 3PL side, our direct customer, the 3PL, cannot or does not want to release the data, whether it's available or not. So we need to get the end user into the boat, because only the data is available. Everybody's talking about how important data is, but then we also have to be open-minded and able to share it with the respective confidentiality aspects in place, naturally. But yes, it is important for us, and the more data is provided to us, I think the more effective the outcome of the solutions that we design based on that and provide to the industry.
Thank you. F.
Yeah, so at IDC we actually survey the pharmaceutical industry, and where we found that there are clear priorities with regards to technology investments. The first investment that we saw come through was connectivity, because while the data may be available, sometimes it's only resident in that machine, and so being able to start to connect that, and some organisations have legacy technology, which that may not necessarily be in place. So first is putting in the wireless infrastructure or the connectivity infrastructure that's going to allow that, followed by the IoT. So whether it's taking advantage of existing connectivity inherent in those machines, or whether it's installing sensors to enable things like vibration control or vibration sensing, temperature sensing, all that sort of thing. So looking at the condition of the machine and being able to determine that was a following investment. After that, we saw the impact of the labour shortages, either through constraints of labour supply or through workforces getting COVID and being down. So we started to see increased investment in robotics. Robotics was on the material handling side as well as in the manufacture. One of the highest levels of investment that we saw from a technology perspective was with packaging robotics. That seemed to be an easier one, and the use of cobots or collaborative robots in that space. So as you know, that's the addressing on the I guess the physical side and looking at getting goods moving. Then there was the information side, and we saw a lot of emphasis on information, automation and remote. And with that, we've seen accelerated investments in transportation carrier management systems, warehouse management systems, to be able to get that visibility. So starting to link the physical to the information flow, and we're seeing transportation management systems being used as de facto supply chain control towers, if you like, so that they're actually able to have the visibility on where shipments are going. Now, these obviously have implications for COVID vaccine movements, but they're also having implications for the rest of the network as well. So these investments are not just something that is paying off with regards to COVID-19 vaccine management, but also with the rest of the organisation. So yeah, when it comes to the use case focus that we've seen, there's been a priority on focusing these on product quality. So as organisations are seeking to maximise the investment that they have made in connectivity, in IoT, in robotics, they're looking at trying to improve product quality as the top priority for investment. Making sure that they're able to get the best out of their assets. So asset performance management has been another one that's come in, so that they know when to expect downtime or when to schedule downtime for repairs. And then of course, ensuring that visibility and agility, so that they're able to get on-time delivery, or at least be able to have the agility to mitigate risk where there are blockages in supply chains. And that's usually done through control towers or de facto software that's been used for control towers. So there's some of the trends that we're seeing out of IDC with regards to that.
Brett?
Thanks, Stephanie. Yeah, I think we've seen a dramatic acceleration in investment in digitalisation in our business also. In the early days, with the kind of reduction of capability of sales forces that we had in many markets, we had to really ramp up our capability for online ordering by customers. And as I touched on earlier, the inability of patients to leave their homes and get the required medical care also made us look at how we could build a connectivity between patients, doctors, and getting prescription fulfilment. So we've had an interesting solution that developed out of the Philippines that we're starting to use across some of the markets as well. Also for our clients, in terms of the transparency of inventory and product movement to customers and to patients, they lost a lot of transparency in the early days, and we worked very hard with our systems to be able to provide them with timely and detailed information in a way that we had done in the past, but more on a periodic basis. So we increased the frequency of that information flow, and it really helped our clients to be able to anticipate what products they were going to need to move from their manufacturing sites in Europe and the US to Asia.
Thank you. Roger?
Yeah, so with the disruption of the airlines and the shipping lines due to COVID-19, so we beef up our company services, Control Tower. So what it actually entails, Control Tower, is not just end-to-end visibility where you order, where you collect the goods from the manufacturer down to the last mile. So we go beyond that. The clients have a demand planning, and they want to trigger order management from SAP to our system. And then we will liaise with all the global freight forwarders, collect data, check documents are correct, make sure that the airlines book, depart on time, vessels don't delay. So we already got a very clear line of sights from order management right up to the delivery. Along the way, we collect a lot of data. So it's not just managing the supply chain of the cold chain pharma products, it's about collecting data, and this data that we use is to allow us to efficiently predict when the shipment is going to arrive, when it's going to be potential delays, or whether that by sea freight is going to be so much tremendous delay like the Suez Canal incident, and then it's better that you go by air freight. So these are things that we have beef up on, and I think that will be the future for moving forward to Control Tower, given the disruption of the airline industries and the shipping lines.
Thank you so much to everyone for all your sharing. I think there's so much to talk about these COVID-19 lessons learned that if we don't end this panelist, they will continue talking until few days later. Okay. So before we end the session, okay, we just want to hear from all of you. Okay, 2 quick points. Okay. So over these 2 years, what are some of the supply chain practices that you have seen that you feel could have been better managed? And of course, what are some of the future opportunities that you foresee, okay, that could be happening in the coming years in order to enable us to be better prepared for any of such pandemics happening? Let's start with Roger.
Yeah, so with the COVID-19 vaccines being available, one of my experience that there was some counterfeit vaccines available in Southeast Asia. And we were told to activate, to collect, and to test it to the European labs to test whether is it a counterfeit or is it a genuine product. So I think moving forward, learning from this experience, I think the next technology is blockchain technology, where you link up with the various stakeholders. So you know that from the source at the pharmacies or wherever you receive the vaccine, when you scan the QR code or barcode, you know that the authenticity of the drugs. So I think the blockchain will be the next thing. Thank you.
Carsten?
Okay, let me start with the opportunities. I strongly believe, and I pointed it out in the presentation earlier as well, there's a lot of benefits in the automation part of the cold chain. So there's lots of opportunities there. The trick is only, the challenge is to choose the correct one, to apply the correct one, to implement the correct level of automation. It doesn't need to be fully automated, it has to be the right selection. And that also brings me then back to what is going wrong, not only in the last 2 years, but I think along this whole process is really focus on proper planning. Think about your strategy. Don't apply a technology just because the competition is doing the same. Don't apply a technology because it is considered sexy. Just really look at your own requirements, look into your history, into your future, analyze the data that are available when it comes to the operation inside the warehouse, and then make the right choice.
Steph?
Yeah, so I would think, I like the idea of analysing and not just implementing the next sexy thing. I think that's incredibly important. I do think there is an opportunity that we do need to take advantage of, and that is in collaborating. Carsten mentioned briefly about sharing data and being open to doing so, and I think that's a big opportunity that's going to not just help us with things like COVID vaccine distribution, but also in being able to take the sustainability conversation forward. Right? We're going to need that sort of transparency. And I think that information sharing across the supply chain, regardless of whether it's for COVID or whether it's for other industries, is going to be incredibly important. And I think organisations that may have capitalised on opportunities from COVID need to make sure that they're making those technology investments to be able to deliver on that.
Thanks, Steph. I think certainly we learned pretty quickly that we had to be a lot closer to governments and to the regulatory authorities than we might have been pre-COVID, and you know, our designation as an essential industry in many markets allowed us to pivot quickly when we needed to, so that was important. I think also on the topic of collaboration, it was extremely important to us to understand where our suppliers were getting their materials from as well. And because we were ramping up our cold chain packaging solutions capability, we had to have a very strong, we already had a strong relationship, thankfully, with our passive packaging system provider. And because they were ramping up their supplies in Europe and the US, it was important that we had visibility of where the pressure points were going to be for them, so that we could anticipate what we would need and when we would need to order. And I think that worked particularly well. So that was quite effective. And I think also, as I touched on with the digital side of things, and we've talked about the technologies, that technology will continue to evolve. We still don't have the transparency that we want to have, and that's a combination of the maturity of the technology plus the available infrastructure capabilities in the markets, the telecommunications infrastructures and those types of things as well. So still lots of potential there.
Thank you very much. So in summary, what I'm hearing from the panelists, that there could be these three main components in terms of what we learned. First of all is collaboration, so different partnerships between the regulatories as well as the suppliers and all the other stakeholders in the ecosystem is important. And then we also talk about data visibility. So we have to be open and share this information across all the different parties in the system as well, okay, in order to be able to better manage this whole COVID-19 outbreak. And of course, technology is important. Okay, without the deployment of technology, okay, a lot of things, our hands will be tied. Okay, we cannot do what we are supposed to do. Okay, so with that, I think I will bring the session to a close. If you have any more questions that